The snow was falling softly when Olivia recognized him among the glamorous guests. In the hall, adorned with shimmering lights, she carried a revelation that would change everything. An innocent boy needed the father he had never known. And in the cold of that winter, a billionaire's heart would discover the warmth of a true family. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Olivia balanced a tray of hors d'oeuvres on one hand as she stepped into the grand lobby, immediately hit by a chilly gust each time the hotel's tall doors swung open. The crystalline air that came off the snow-covered mountains seeped into the opulent space, battling the expensive heating lamps lining the entrance. She tugged her uniform sleeve down a little to fend off the cold, reminding herself to focus on her job. The winter gala was in full swing tonight, and the guests were all wealthy, important, or both. She carefully wove through the crowd, navigating clusters of elegantly dressed investors and well-known philanthropists. As she passed a small group chatting in low, conspiratorial tones, she glanced up and froze in place. There he was. Logan, the hotel's distinguished host for the evening, stood at the center of a circle of admirers, wearing a navy blue suit that fit him perfectly and a poised expression that commanded the room's attention. He looked different from the man she had known years ago. His hair was slightly shorter and styled more sharply, and a certain confidence seemed to radiate from him now. She felt her pulse flare with a mix of nervousness and old emotion she thought she'd buried. Lowering her gaze before he could glance her way, Olivia focused on the path ahead. Dropping her tray now would be a sure way to attract the worst kind of attention. She needed this job, more than ever. A colleague brushed past, tilting his head in Logan's direction. "He's even more successful this year," the colleague murmured. "I heard he closed a massive international deal last month. People are fighting to get a minute of his time tonight." Olivia managed a tight-lipped nod. She remembered the same magnetic charm, the same determined ambition that he had carried back when they first met, before her life shifted in ways she could have never imagined. Suddenly, a sharp voice from the kitchen broke through her thoughts. "Olivia, we need more plates of canapes, immediately!" Mateo, the head chef, was beckoning her with frantic gestures. Steam and the smell of fresh pastries billowed from the kitchen doors behind him. She hurried over, grateful for something to do besides staring into the distant corner of the ballroom where Logan and his circle of investors held court. Mateo's brow was furrowed, but his voice softened as she drew closer. "Sorry to rush you. I know you've got a lot on your mind. Could you set out the next round of hors d'oeuvres on the buffet table?" Nodding gratefully, Olivia passed him her near-empty tray and took the newly garnished platters he offered. Warm cheese puffs and delicate pastries glistened under the kitchen's bright lights. As she held them, the heat seeped through her thin serving gloves, a welcome contrast to the drafty lobby. Mateo's eyes flickered with concern. "You all right? You look a bit shaken?" She offered a small, forced smile. "I'm fine, just the cold, and the crowd." The chef's expression told her he suspected more, but he let it go. He had been the only one in the hotel staff she'd ever confided in, at least partially. He knew of her child, though not the full story behind who Noah's father really was. Olivia carried the steaming trays out to the sprawling buffet set up by a panoramic window. The sight of the snow-capped mountains in the distance made her think of all the paths not taken, roads that might have led her to a different destiny. If she had spoken up sooner years ago, if Logan hadn't left so abruptly to chase that big dream, maybe she wouldn't be slinking around in the shadows now, trying to conceal the existence of their son. A sudden burst of laughter from across the hall drew her attention back to him. Logan was greeting a new group of guests, each handshake paired with that same self-assured grin. Her stomach clenched. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember his boyish smile when they first met, the warmth of his voice when he had confided his hopes for success. He had always talked about the future as if it were a conquerable mountain. Back then, She'd felt like anything was possible with him by her side. The memory made her throat tighten. She quickly deposited the platters on the buffet and arranged them neatly, then stepped back to assess her work. If only it were as easy to straighten out her own life. Without meaning to, she glanced in Logan's direction again. One of his investors was patting him on the shoulder, clearly impressed by whatever news Logan had just shared. The entire scene reminded her of how different their worlds had become, how far he had climbed while she had been busy raising a child in secret. Before she could slip away, a tall, elegantly dressed man with a press badge clipped to his lapel approached, phone in hand. He smiled, a little too shrewdly. "Pardon me, are you on staff here?" She stepped closer, adjusting her uniform. "Yes, is everything all right?" "Oh, fine, fine," he said, though his quick gaze darted from her to Logan in the distance. "I've seen you looking that way. Got your eye on Mr. Big Shot? Everyone seems to be fascinated by him tonight." "I'm just doing my job," she replied, trying to keep her tone polite and final. "Sure you are," he teased. "Well, if you spot anything interesting about our esteemed host, you let me know." He gave her a wink. "I'm writing a feature on Logan's philanthropic efforts." He stepped away without waiting for her response. A faint chill crawled up her spine. Reporters at these events thrived on gossip, and they often sniffed out personal drama lurking beneath the polished surfaces. A sudden call from Mateo disrupted her thoughts again. "Olivia, another crisis in the kitchen. We're short on cutlery for the dessert table." She hurried back, weaving through the crowd as carefully as she could. Each time she passed a group of guests, she felt an uncomfortable knot in her stomach, certain that any passing glance might hold suspicion or curiosity. Inside the kitchen, the clank of pots and pans, the rush of staff plating dishes, and the sizzle of last-minute appetizers provided a momentary comfort, familiar chaos. Mateo pulled her aside. "Relax," he said, placing a bundle of forks in her hands. "Just get these to the dessert station. Everything else will sort itself out." His calm voice was a balm, but only for a moment. She nodded, grateful he was covering some of her tasks. Ever since she'd confided the existence of Noah to him, he'd quietly done his best to watch her back. After placing the extra cutlery at the dessert table, she stole a moment to catch her breath near a large floor-to-ceiling window. The dark peaks of the surrounding mountains loomed, dotted with the soft glow of distant cabin lights. She took out her phone briefly and opened a photo folder labeled with her son's name. There, Noah's bright green eyes and mischievous grin stared back at her, causing her heart to clench. Part of her wanted to run straight to the staff quarters where he was tucked away with the co-worker she'd trusted to look after him. But the night wasn't even half over. She whispered to the phone's screen, "Hang in there, little guy." Slipping the device back into her pocket, she turned away from the window, determined to make it through the rest of the night without falling apart. She'd do her job, avoid Logan, and keep Noah safe. That was the plan. But her plan began to unravel the second she stepped back onto the main floor with a new tray of champagne. The energy in the room had shifted. There was a buzz that suggested something momentous was about to happen. Several people were pointing or whispering, not with alarm, but with a certain curiosity that set Olivia's nerves on edge. She forced herself to keep walking, eyes straight ahead as she distributed the champagne flutes. There was the clinking of glass, the murmur of conversation, and the subdued music that never seemed to stop. Each step brought her closer to the cluster of guests surrounding Logan again. She could feel the tension coil in her muscles. Finally, she reached a polished wood table just a few steps away from him. Her heart felt like a runaway train. There was no detour to take. She had to place the champagne there. Plastering on a neutral smile, she gently set each flute in its stand. Suddenly, the conversation around her quieted, and an acute awareness washed over her. She sensed eyes on her, a gravitational pull drawing her to look up. Hesitating, she took a breath, then raised her head. Logan was looking straight at her. He had paused mid-sentence, gaze fixed on her face as if trying to place where he'd seen her before. His group of investors seemed oblivious, still laughing about something, but Logan's expression was captured by a dim memory. For a moment she wondered if he could hear how fast her heart was drumming. Her first impulse was to whirl around and disappear before he could speak, but her feet stayed rooted to the spot, a swirl of panic and something she couldn't name anchoring her in place. His eyes, so familiar yet somehow deeper with time, studied her with a flicker of recognition. The tray in her hands felt impossibly heavy, and her breathing seemed to stop altogether. He took one small step closer, an uncertain question hovering in his gaze. She willed herself not to show fear, but she felt as exposed as if the entire ballroom were shining a spotlight on her secret. She set the tray down, swallowing hard. Maybe he would just assume she was a random staff member who looked vaguely familiar. Maybe he'd dismiss her presence and move on. But in her heart, she knew better. She could see the puzzle pieces forming in his mind. In the moment it took for another guest to greet him, she made her move. Olivia turned, pressing her way back toward the kitchen, pulse hammering a wild tempo against her ribcage. She didn't get far, only a few steps, before caution forced her to look over her shoulder. He was still watching her, brow furrowed. A faint line appeared between his dark brows, the subtle sign of a man who refused to let a mystery go unsolved. Every nerve in her body lit up in anxious anticipation. Would he follow? Even with all the swirling concerns about her job, about Noah, and about the heartbreak that might resurface, a small part of her felt something else, a longing, an echo of what they'd once been. She shook it off, focusing on her next move, vanish into the kitchen, keep her composure, and survive the night. Yet as she ducked behind a high arrangement of orchids, she glanced back one last time. Their eyes locked again, and in that silent exchange, the truth seemed to hover just out of reach. Olivia's heart thunders as Logan seems to recognize her. Though he looks puzzled, the intensity of his gaze suggests lingering questions. She wonders if he's about to approach her, and if so, what on earth she'll say. Logan took a quick step forward, his gaze locked on Olivia's retreating figure. He called out to her softly, but his voice got swallowed up in the swirl of conversation and clinking champagne glasses. Without turning around, she darted behind an ornate ice sculpture display, heart pounding as she tried to blend back into the bustling crowd. Slipping into a side corridor near the kitchen, Olivia let out a shaky breath. She leaned against the wall, eyes momentarily closed. She couldn't decide if she felt relieved or regretful that Logan hadn't managed to corner her. It had only been seconds since their eyes met, yet it felt like everything was spinning out of control. The memories she'd kept bottled away rushed to the surface, pressing on her chest. She remembered the day they met as if it were yesterday. Logan had been charming and full of wild ambitions, sharing dreams of making his mark on the world. She, newly hired at a small catering company, found it impossible not to be swept up by his enthusiasm. They'd spent a few late nights talking about life, about leaving footprints bigger than anyone believed possible. Their spark turned into a quiet romance, one that ended abruptly when he left for an unexpected international deal. After that, silence. She never found the right time or courage to tell him what she discovered a few weeks later. Her pulse hammered harder at the recollection of looking down at a positive pregnancy test and realizing that everything had changed in an instant. After fruitless attempts to reach Logan, she'd accepted that he had moved on. She'd tried to do the same, though in a vastly different way. "Hey," a voice interrupted gently. Mateo, wearing his customary white chef's jacket and a concerned look, had found her. "You okay?" She nodded, still trying to steady her breathing. "Yeah, I just need a minute." He shifted to block her from view of any passing guests. "Take a moment," he murmured. "I can handle your station, no problem. Just catch your breath." A wave of gratitude warmed her. Mateo was her one confidant here, the only one who knew what was truly going on in her life. His kindness reminded her that she had allies, even in this swirl of secrets and anxieties. She tried to form a thankful smile, but her nerves were too frayed. Over the faint hum of voices coming from the ballroom, she heard the sharp click of a camera shutter. She peered around the corner in time to see a lanky journalist prowling around, phone in hand, ID badge swinging from a lanyard. He wore the smug half-smile of someone who thrived on rumor, and even from a distance, she could sense him sniffing for something scandalous. It sent a chill up her spine. Before she could vanish deeper into the corridors, a server rushed out of the kitchen, nearly colliding with her. "We're short on canapes," he exclaimed, pushing an empty tray into her hands. "Mateo, we need at least 3 more plates ready for the next wave of guests. They're swarming the buffet table." Mateo ran a quick hand through his hair, nodding in exasperation. "All right, I'll put some more pastries in. Olivia, do you mind?" She looked from the corridor toward the kitchen, realizing she had no real escape. "Sure," she said, forcing a steady tone. "I'll help fill these up." The two of them rushed back to the kitchen where staff bustled in frantic harmony. But as Olivia grabbed fresh canapes, that journalist from earlier suddenly appeared at the doorway, eyes zeroed in on her. He sidled up, wearing an overly friendly grin. She tried to stay focused on her task, but her heart fluttered uncomfortably. "You're working quite hard," he remarked. "You were out there serving, now you're in here. Someone must be really motivated." He let the words dangle, then added, "Busy night, huh? I noticed you were looking pretty intently at our dear host, Mr. Logan. Anything interesting you want to share?" Olivia kept her face neutral, ignoring the slip in her stomach. "Not really. I'm just doing my job." His interest sharpened. "Uh-huh. Well, if you happen to know anything, like, his personal situation, hidden troubles, that sort of thing, you let me know." He chuckled, leaning in slightly. "People eat up that kind of scoop." She placed the last row of hors d'oeuvres on the tray, her jaw clenched. "I don't have any information for you. Now, if you'll excuse me." She attempted to brush past him, but he blocked her path, raising his eyebrows in feigned innocence. "No need to be defensive. I'm just talking." Irritation prickled at her. The last thing she needed was a journalist sniffing around for a scandal that wasn't his to exploit. Before her temper could flare further, Mateo accidentally nudged into the man's side with a freshly loaded tray, almost knocking the camera from the journalist's grasp. A short, sharp argument broke out, the journalist bristling as he checked his lens for damage. "Watch it, buddy," the journalist snapped, stepping back. "Why don't you watch where you're standing?" Mateo shot back, though there was a frantic apology layered under his frustration. He didn't want to cause a scene any more than Olivia did. Hearing the commotion, a few of the gala guests, drawn by the raised voices, glanced toward the kitchen. It only escalated when Logan appeared at the edge of the hallway, a slight crease on his forehead as he took in the tense scene. The journalist turned to him, exhaling in relief, as if Logan were an ally. "Mr. Logan, do you realize your staff nearly destroyed my camera? I'm just trying to capture some snapshots of this wonderful event. Perhaps you need to have a word with them about—" Olivia stepped in, mustering her calmest tone. "I'm very sorry. We're in a rush trying to keep everyone served. Let me get you a fresh drink to replace anything that might have spilled, all right?" Her quiet composure seemed to diffuse the journalist's anger before it could escalate, and he lowered his camera. "Fine," he muttered. "But next time, try not to run me over." Logan, watching from a few steps away, looked impressed by her swift resolution. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, as if he was trying to piece together where he knew her from. He approached slowly, scanning her face. Olivia's cheeks grew warm, a rush of memories threatening to surface. She could sense the curiosity in him, the sense that he was on the brink of remembering everything. "You handled that well," he remarked, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Thank you for preventing a scene." She nodded, trying to avoid the intensity of his gaze. "He was just looking for a story," she murmured. "I didn't want him to start rumors." Logan studied her, the lines of his face softening. "I feel like we've met before," he said quietly. A long time ago. Her heart pounded. Part of her wanted to disappear. Another part of her wanted to tell him everything. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on a point near his shoulder as if making eye contact would unravel her. Maybe briefly, she mumbled, nerves shaking her voice. I wouldn't expect you to remember me. With the journalist still hovering nearby, Logan lowered his voice further. Wait, didn't you? He paused, recollection flickering in his eyes. Olivia's mind spun, searching for a way to change the subject, but a group of onlookers parted, allowing them a sliver of privacy. She could practically see Logan stepping through a corridor of memories, inch by inch recalling nights they once shared, a connection that ended too soon. She bit her lip, trying to keep from trembling. At that moment, several more guests wandered closer as though drawn by Logan's presence. The journalist hovered with fresh interest, angling for any tidbit. Olivia swallowed the knot in her throat, stepping back to give Logan space, but he reached a hand out, almost as if to stop her. Why did you leave? He asked, voice gentle yet urgent. You just vanished one day. I tried. Logan! A child's voice cut through the buzz. A small boy, around 4 or 5, rushed up and grabbed Logan's hand. Daddy, come look at the ice sculpture with me, he insisted, tugging on Logan's sleeve. Logan froze in place, his confusion plain. He glanced down at the boy, then back at the circle of people, uncertain how to respond. But for Olivia, it felt like a lightning strike. Her breath stopped, her stomach flipping. The word daddy echoed in her mind, colliding with the secret she carried so tightly under her skin. She stepped backward, trying to gather herself before anyone noticed her reaction. Logan looked stunned, though a polite laugh from a nearby investor clarified that the child belonged to someone else in the group. Still, the shock lingered on his face, a moment of raw vulnerability that unsettled both of them. Olivia's heart thudded painfully against her ribs. She had lived with the hidden truth for years, but hearing that little word now, right in front of Logan, made everything heavier. Logan freezes in confusion, but Olivia is the one truly shaken by hearing that word, Daddy. The moment sparks an even bigger question. Will Logan finally suspect that Olivia's child could be his? A startled hush fell between them as the little boy's voice echoed off the marble floor. It took several awkward heartbeats before the boy's mother, a well-dressed investor, hastily appeared to usher him away, explaining with a laugh that he often mistook people for his father when excited. The guests nearby smiled politely, relieved there was no real faux pas. But Olivia couldn't shake the eerie sense that she was standing on a thin sheet of ice, one crack away from revealing the secret she'd guarded for so long. She pressed her lips together, trying not to let her own shock show. Logan offered a good-natured chuckle to the group, but his gaze snapped back to her with an intensity that made her cheeks burn. She could feel his questions swirling, as if he were replaying every glance she'd cast his way that evening and wondering what lay beneath it. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction, Olivia slipped away into the staff corridor, heart hammering like she'd run a mile sprint. She needed to check on Noah. The idea of seeing that little boy call Logan Daddy had shaken her more than she cared to admit. What if Noah wandered out next? She couldn't risk anyone making the connection, and certainly not with that persistent journalist lurking around every corner. Rounding a corner, she nearly collided with a junior staff member who was carrying a stack of folded linens. The linens wobbled dangerously as the young woman let out a gasp. "Sorry," Olivia exclaimed, steadying the top of the pile. "Have you seen Lisa? She was supposed to be watching my friend's child in the break room." "Oh, Lisa's on the third-floor lounge right now. Something about a guest complaining of missing scarves," the staffer replied, readjusting her load. "But I'm sure the little one is still asleep. She said he was dozing off after some hot chocolate." Olivia murmured her thanks and wove through a narrow hallway that led deeper into the staff quarters. Her footsteps echoed off the plain tile floors, a stark contrast to the lavish carpeting in the ballroom. The closer she got to the break room, the stronger her urge grew to make sure Noah was safe. She couldn't help but imagine him innocently wandering into the Gala, his bright eyes searching for her, unaware of the bombshell he could drop just by existing. Pushing open the door, she found Noah curled up on a makeshift cot with a fuzzy blanket tucked under his chin. Relief flooded her. She knelt down, brushing a hand lightly over his soft hair. He stirred and blinked a few times, giving her a drowsy smile. "Mommy?" he mumbled, voice still heavy with sleep. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered. "Everything's okay. Just rest a bit longer, all right? I'll be back soon." He nodded, then sank back into the blanket with a soft sigh. She stayed there a moment, absorbing the quiet presence of the boy who had changed her life. It had been such a delicate balance, raising him on her own while clinging to the hope of eventually telling Logan in a calmer setting. Yet here they were, in the middle of a grand hotel with tensions rising by the minute. She left as quietly as she'd come, letting the door click shut behind her. Almost immediately, she heard a familiar male voice drifting down the hallway. It was Logan, speaking with someone just around the corner. Her heart leapt into her throat. She stepped closer, keeping to the shadows. "Look, I can't talk here," Logan was saying in a hushed tone. "We'll discuss it after the event, all right?" Yes, I'm fine. Just a strange moment out there with a kid." He paused, and Olivia could almost see his expression tighten. "No, it's nothing. I promise." She pressed her back against the wall, waiting for him to walk away. Each second felt like an hour, fear and hope tangling inside her. Was he curious about why that split second had felt so significant? Did he sense there was more to her disappearance all those years ago? After a moment, Logan's footsteps retreated in the opposite direction. Olivia exhaled, grateful she hadn't been forced to confront him in that deserted hallway. She wasn't prepared. Not yet. The last thing she wanted was for him to find out about Noah in a rushed, chaotic confrontation. Returning to the main kitchen, she discovered a wave of fresh demands. Staff were short on waiters, a tray of appetizers had gone missing, and a pastry chef was in crisis over icing that wasn't setting properly. Mateo stood amid it all, arms folded, directing everyone like a battlefield commander. He spotted Olivia and raised an eyebrow. "How's the little one?" he asked quietly, once she was within earshot. "He's all right, sleeping," she replied, grabbing an apron. "Thanks for covering for me." Mateo nodded. "No problem, but be careful. That journalist is prowling again. I saw him in the corridor near the restrooms trying to overhear staff conversations." Her stomach clenched. "Great. Exactly what we need." The sound of a glass shattering spilled in from the ballroom, followed by a murmur of alarmed voices. Mateo snorted. "Go see what that was, would you? I'll hold down the fort here." She ducked out of the kitchen, weaving among servers who carried trays of canapés and flutes of champagne. The event had reached its peak, with guests meandering through the lavishly decorated halls, some stumbling upon corners they had no business being in. Soft music from a live quartet drifted in the background, trying to maintain an air of elegance despite the undercurrent of chaos. In the center of the ballroom, a tall, elegantly dressed man stood surveying broken shards of glass on the floor, a mixture of embarrassment and annoyance on his face. Nearby staff scrambled for a broom and dustpan. The man was one of Logan's major investors, known for his commanding presence. Logan himself was at a different side of the room, politely listening to a group of donors praising him for his philanthropic efforts. Olivia quietly helped a server sweep up the shards, her thoughts drifting to Logan again. She remembered how proud he had been of his philanthropic projects. Perhaps that was what made him so alluring. Beneath the sleek exterior was a genuine desire to do good. Would that same warmth extend to fatherhood if he found out the truth? Once the glass was cleared, she stood up and caught a glimpse of Logan breaking away from his admirers, scanning the crowd as though searching for someone. She tensed, certain he was looking for her. Ducking behind the tower of fresh pastries, she pretended to rearrange them with great care, unable to stop the swirl of conflicting emotions inside her. Mateo's voice rang in her earpiece, calling for help in the kitchen. Grateful for the distraction, she slipped out of sight before Logan could spot her. She found Mateo hunched over a large mixing bowl, his normally steady hands trembling slightly as he piped frosting. The pastry chef hovered beside him, looking on in panic. "I can't believe the cooling system gave out on the last batch of cupcakes," Mateo hissed, passing Olivia the piping bag. "Try to keep them somewhat presentable. We can't disappoint the VIP table." She focused on piping swirls of frosting, forcing her thoughts away from Logan and Noah. As the tension of the gala buzzed around her, she pressed carefully on the piping bag, forming neat whirls. Something about the slow, methodical motion eased her nerves, if only temporarily. In the distance, she could still hear the hum of music and laughter. Someone announced that the philanthropic portion of the evening would soon begin in earnest, with Logan expected to deliver a short speech. She felt her chest tighten at the thought of facing him again, especially under the watchful eyes of so many curious guests and that persistent journalist. Mateo pulled a fresh tray from the oven, sliding it next to Olivia. "All right, how do you want to handle the rest of the night?" he asked quietly, glancing at her. "You've been edgy since you saw him." She set the piping bag down, meeting Mateo's gaze. "I'm close to telling him," she admitted in a low voice. "I don't see how I can keep it hidden much longer. He saw Noah, only it wasn't Noah. It was some other boy calling him Daddy. But it just made everything feel so inevitable." Mateo's brow creased. "Do you want to do it here, in the middle of all this chaos?" His voice brimmed with caution, as if expecting she might regret a hasty confession. "I'm not sure," she confessed. "But I also don't want him to think I deliberately kept this from him forever. It wasn't supposed to be like this." Before Mateo could respond, the kitchen manager barged in, panting from exertion. "Olivia, we need you out front," she gasped. "The main course is delayed because the ovens are acting up again, and guests are starting to ask questions." Olivia wiped her hands on a towel, mind racing. She wanted to talk to Logan, to finally let it all spill out, but the job she so desperately needed was on the line. If the event turned into a mess, she'd lose more than just a paycheck. Confusion churned in her gut. Which was more pressing, protecting her livelihood or finding the courage to admit Noah's existence? She started toward the door, then paused in the threshold. She had to decide. Either go and smooth over the crisis, or track down Logan for a private conversation. Her breath caught in her throat as she hovered there, 100 different outcomes flickering in her mind. Olivia is torn. Should she handle the urgent staff crisis, or follow her resolve to finally talk to Logan? She hesitates in the corridor, a decision that could change her and Noah's life hanging in the balance. Olivia stood outside the busy coat check area, a restless knot in her stomach. She had volunteered to help solve the latest mishap. An expensive coat had gone missing, and the furious owner was making a scene at the desk. Despite her inner turmoil, she summoned the cool politeness she'd cultivated in customer service. "I promise we'll find it," she said softly, trying to soothe the anxious guest. "We have a systematic tagging process. Let me just confirm that your ticket isn't mixed up with someone else's." The man paced, clearly irritated. "There's no mistake on my part. That coat cost more than your monthly salary, I'm sure." She bristled at his words but bit back a retort. "I understand your frustration, sir," she managed. "Let me run a quick check in the back." He let out a snort and continued pacing, so she slipped behind a small curtain where racks of coats crowded together. It was hot back there, and her head swam with the mingling of different perfumes and colognes. Focusing on the row of black and gray coats, she matched each claim ticket to the right tag, praying the missing one would surface. The intense hush of the closed space only amplified her pounding pulse. After a few frantic minutes of sliding hangers and checking pockets, she found it. Tucked behind a flamboyant fur coat was the garment in question. Grateful relief washed over her. She carried it back out front, apologizing profusely as she handed it over. The guest snatched it away, muttering something about incompetence before striding back to the ballroom. Olivia steadied her breathing, relieved to have a short moment of calm. The entire night had been a minefield, each moment threatening to blow her secret wide open. Yet every time she came close to telling Logan the truth, some crisis or interruption stepped in. As she turned to leave, she saw a familiar figure lurking a few paces away, phone in hand. It was the journalist again, the one who smelled drama like a bloodhound. He gave her a sly smile that sent a shiver across her skin. "Busy night?" he asked casually, stepping closer. "Seems like you're the go-to woman for hotel mishaps." She tried not to show her annoyance. "I'm a hard worker, that's all." He raised his brows in mock innocence. "Hard worker? Who also seems to know Logan rather well. I saw you talking earlier." "We barely spoke," she replied, steering her voice toward calm disinterest. "He's the host. I'm staff. That's all." The journalist's eyes flickered, as though weighing her words. "You seemed tense around him. Anything I should know?" He offered a disarming grin, but his gaze was like a steel trap waiting to snap shut. Her heart rate ticked up, but she forced herself to maintain composure. "There's nothing to tell. If you'll excuse me." He shifted to block her path slightly, lowering his voice. "You can trust me, you know. If there's a bigger story behind that barely spoke, I'd much rather hear it directly from you than dig it out of rumors." Olivia felt her pulse trip in alarm. Panic bubbled at the back of her throat. She could see exactly what angle he was taking. The journalist would do anything to feed the gossip pages, maybe even invent details if it meant a splashy headline. "I have nothing to say." She tried to slip around him, but he pivoted to keep her in place. Just as her frustration threatened to boil over, she heard Logan's voice. "Is there a problem here?" Both Olivia and the journalist turned. Logan stood with that polished confidence that never seemed to waver, his eyes narrowed. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't harass my employees," he added, directing a pointed look at the journalist. The man shrugged, a thin smile on his lips. "No harassment. We were just chatting. She's apparently too busy to answer a few harmless questions." Logan placed a hand lightly on Olivia's shoulder, guiding her away from the journalist. "She has work to do," he said, the finality in his tone impossible to miss. With that, he led her down the corridor, footsteps echoing off the marble floor. Once they were out of earshot, he dropped his hand, turning to face her. "Are you okay?" She nodded, her nerves still jangling from the confrontation. "He just keeps, I don't know, sniffing around for something." Logan's mouth hardened. "He's been pestering me too, asking about my private life, but I can handle him. You don't need to do it alone." She tried to thank him, but the words tangled in her throat. His concern, the warmth in his voice, those were the qualities she remembered so vividly from before. Somehow it felt both comforting and terrifying to see traces of that same man again. He slipped his hands into his suit pockets, studying her with renewed urgency. "When we spoke earlier, before that kid distracted us, you seemed like you wanted to say something." Her pulse spiked. She let out a shaky breath, deciding the moment was too ripe with tension to dance around anymore. "It's just that we used to know each other, yes," he cut in, his tone gentle but certain. "I remember that much. But why did you leave so suddenly years ago? You were just gone. I tried calling the number you gave me, but it was disconnected. What happened?" Heat crept up her neck. She felt trapped, cornered by his questions and the closeness of the corridor's walls. Somewhere beyond them, the party carried on, laughter, music, the clinking of silverware. She clutched her hands together, trying not to tremble. "I wanted to tell you something important," she began softly. "But you got an opportunity abroad. You were so excited. I didn't want to get in the way." His expression darkened a shade. "You wouldn't have been getting in the way." She forced a bitter smile. "You don't know that. Everything happened so fast." He stepped closer, voice dropping to a low murmur. "There was more to it, though. I can see it in your eyes. You vanished and it felt like you'd decided we were done." Her heart squeezed painfully. She opened her mouth, ready to let the words spill about the pregnancy test, the terrifying realization she was alone, the countless nights she debated reaching out. But anxiety clamped over her voice. Could she just say it here, in the hallway, with that journalist possibly lurking nearby? Her chest tightened until she felt she could barely breathe. Before she could decide, the lights flickered. The faint music from the ballroom hiccuped, and the corridor plunged into semi-darkness. Olivia's eyes widened as a surge of startled voices filtered in from the main hall. "What now?" Logan muttered, scanning the hall as emergency lights kicked on, bathing everything in a dim, reddish glow. All around them, staff rushed to reset the electrical panels, while guests murmured in confusion in the next room. Olivia swallowed, forcibly calming her pounding heart. The timing of this partial blackout felt like one more test on an already difficult night. A staff member ran past, flashlight bobbing, calling for assistance to check the fuse box. Another urged everyone to stay calm, promising the main power would be back soon. Logan started to move in that direction, but paused when he saw how shaken Olivia looked. "Stay here," he said gently, though his eyes remained intense. "We're not done talking. I need to know the truth, Olivia." She attempted a nod, her throat too tight to form words. She could feel the weight of what she hadn't said pressing in on her. Now the question wasn't if she'd tell him, but when. The partial darkness amplified the urgency in his gaze, lit only by the weak glow of emergency lamps. A moment later, he hurried off to help the staff figure out the power problem, leaving her alone in the corridor. She released a trembling breath, leaning against the wall as her mind whirred. It was no longer a matter of avoiding him. She could see the resolve written on his face. He wanted answers, and soon. All down the hallway, she heard faint commotion, staff voices echoing against the walls. Someone announced that only part of the ballroom was still lit, that some guests had taken out their phones to guide their way around. Olivia closed her eyes, telling herself she had to be strong no matter what. A single thought pounded in her mind. This can't wait any longer. He's bound to find out, maybe the hard way if I don't speak up. Yet the idea of revealing the truth in a chaotic, semi-dark corner of a grand gala made her stomach twist. She had never pictured it happening like this. Still reeling from her near confession, she pressed her palms to her temples, trying to quell the pounding. She imagined Noah, asleep in the back room, waiting quietly for her return. Her sweet son, Logan's son. How long could she keep them apart? When Logan returned, the lights were flickering uncertainly. She looked up to see him stepping closer, determination in his every stride. Outside, in the distant winter darkness, thunder rumbled. Not a loud clap, but a low, rolling sound that hinted at an approaching storm. He halted just inches away, the red glow sharpening the intensity in his face. "You're going to tell me, aren't you?" he said quietly. "Whatever secret you've been keeping, I have to know." The corridor felt as though it was shrinking around them. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She parted her lips, struggling to speak, but the words refused to form. She saw the flicker of hurt in his eyes, and that alone nearly broke her. She wanted to say yes, to let it all come out. But right before she found the courage, someone from hotel security called Logan's name, urging him to come deal with an agitated group of guests who were complaining about the blackout. He looked torn, glancing between the security guard and Olivia, caught between duty and the demands of his own heart. Olivia lowered her gaze, stepping back. "Go," she whispered. "I won't run from you anymore." He nodded slowly, then turned to follow the security guard. Olivia stayed pinned to the spot, trembling in the dim light. She could sense that everything in her life was about to shift. Logan turns toward the staff area, convinced Olivia is hiding something monumental, and he's resolved to find out exactly what it is. Logan navigated the staff corridor, the echoes of the partial blackout still lingering in the distant corners of the ballroom. The dim lighting turned the hallways into a maze of shadows and soft humming lights. Despite that, the determination in his step never wavered. Every so often a staff member rushed by, arms filled with linens or trays, apologizing in hushed tones as they brushed past him. He kept going, drawn by a need to find Olivia and finally get the answers he knew she was holding back. A few halls over, Olivia sprinted toward the break room, her heart pounding in her ears. She was still rattled from her near confession when she'd spoken to Logan in that flickering corridor. But there was no time to dwell on the burst of fear in his eyes. Now, a terrible dread curled in her stomach as she realized she'd stayed away from Noah too long. Flinging open the break room door, she froze. The fold-out cot where he'd been napping lay empty, blanket tossed aside. Immediately, her thoughts went wild. Noah was only 3. Anything could happen if he wandered off. The hallways were teeming with guests, some half in the dark. She could already picture him stumbling into the Gala, or worse, running into that relentless journalist. She whirled around, mind racing. Her first instinct was to charge through every hallway, calling Noah's name, but a voice behind her caused her to spin back. Mateo, in a sauce-stained apron, looked alarmed to see her face so pale. "Olivia, what's wrong?" he asked, stepping closer. "It's Noah," she managed, voice tight. "He's gone from the break room. I don't know where he went." Mateo didn't waste a second. "We'll find him," he said firmly, hurrying to a nearby staff phone. Within moments, he had put out a low-key request to the other employees. A small boy, green eyes, probably carrying a plush toy, last seen wearing dark pants and a fuzzy sweater. Olivia mouthed her thanks, breath hitching in her chest. "Don't panic," Mateo advised, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll search every corridor." Together, they rushed out into the labyrinth of hallways, splitting up to check different corners of the hotel. Olivia's heart pounded as she searched the quiet lounge areas, storerooms, even peeking into vacant meeting rooms. No sign of Noah. Fear squeezed her chest tighter with each second. If he wandered too close to the main gala, there was no telling what trouble he might stumble into. Meanwhile, Logan followed the faint sounds of footsteps echoing through the staff wing. At first, he thought it might be Olivia, but the pattern was too light, too uneven. It didn't sound like an adult's hurried strides. Rounding a corner, he paused at the foot of a tall column, trying to get his bearings in the dim glow cast by wall sconces. That was when he heard a soft, hesitant call. "Mommy?" Followed by the shuffle of small sneakers. A boy peeked out from behind the column, clutching a tiny plush bear. The child's bright green eyes widened at the sight of a strange man. He took a half-step back, his posture tense with uncertainty. Logan, startled to find such a young child wandering alone, instinctively crouched down to appear less imposing. "Hey," he said gently, voice pitched low. "Are you lost?" The boy looked at him warily but didn't run away. A single overhead light revealed a mix of confusion and lingering drowsiness on the child's face. "I want my mommy," he whispered, hugging the plush bear a little closer. Logan felt a sudden jolt of recognition he couldn't explain. Something about the boy's gaze struck him. Maybe it was the familiar shape of his eyes or the arch of his brow. He tried to shake off the sensation and extended a hand. "I'll help you find her," he said softly. "Which way did you come from?" The child's answer was to take a hesitant step closer, though he didn't speak. Logan gently placed a reassuring palm on his shoulder, trying to calm the boy's trembling. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Don't be scared." Before he could say more, Olivia sprinted around the corner, breathing hard. She stopped so abruptly it was as if time froze. Her eyes landed on Noah, then on Logan, who was kneeling right beside him. For a moment, none of them spoke. Noah broke the silence first, looking back at his mother with a relieved smile. "Mommy!" he blurted, scurrying toward her. Olivia scooped him up, arms shaking from the intensity of her panic and relief. Logan rose slowly to his feet, eyes darting between Olivia and the boy. 1,000 questions crowded his mind. The instant he saw how the child's features mirrored some of his own, he felt the floor tilt beneath him. There was no denying the spark of recognition he'd felt a moment ago. His throat went dry, and an unsettling, dawning realization settled over him. Olivia held Noah close, trying to steady her breathing, her cheeks flushed with a mix of relief and dread. She wanted to run, to shield Noah from the inevitable fallout. But Logan was right there, looking at her with an expression that demanded answers. She wasn't sure which weighed more heavily in her chest, the terror of losing her job or the heartbreak of seeing that flicker of betrayal in Logan's eyes. Mateo appeared at the far end of the corridor, having alerted other staff to stand by. Seeing Noah safe, he let out a visible sigh of relief, stepping closer. He reached out, intending to lead Noah away discreetly. But Logan, voice taut, spoke first. "Wait," he said. "Olivia, tell me who he is." She swallowed painfully. This is Noah," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's my son." Logan's gaze flickered back to the child. The boy peered at him curiously from the safety of his mother's arms. The similarities in their features seemed impossible to ignore, something in the shape of those wide-set eyes, the line of the jaw. Logan felt a surge of conflicting emotions, like a puzzle snapping into place far too late. He looks like... He couldn't finish the sentence. Olivia shifted Noah's weight onto her hip, struggling to keep her composure. "I tried to tell you," she said, voice shaking, "but I just never had the chance. Then everything with your business happened and He opened his mouth, but before any words could emerge, a blinding flash lit the corridor. The journalist stood at the corner, camera raised, an almost triumphant gleam in his eyes. In the moment it took Logan to process what was happening, another flash fired, capturing Olivia's panicked expression and Noah clinging to her. Logan's anger ignited. "Leave us alone!" he snapped, striding forward as the journalist backpedaled, grin fading. "Stop harassing my—" He caught himself, not knowing how to finish that sentence either. The journalist took one more picture before turning and darting down the hall, likely to rummage through his bag of sensational headlines. Olivia's grip on Noah tightened, her entire world trembling from the intrusion. Mateo hurried forward, placing a protective arm between them and the corridor where the journalist had vanished. The little boy, overwhelmed by the sudden burst of light and tension, pressed his face into Olivia's shoulder. Breathing hard, Logan turned back to her, eyes filled with the question he no longer needed to ask. He didn't know the full story yet, but the truth was painfully clear. He had a son, and somewhere in the building, a journalist was itching to spread that news to anyone who would pay for it. Fighting to steady her voice, Olivia murmured, "I'm sorry. This isn't how I wanted you to find out." Mateo gave them both a meaningful look, as if urging them to get Noah out of the open. Olivia glanced around, realizing they had become far too vulnerable there in the hallway. She nodded at Mateo, who guided her and Noah down a side passage. Logan lingered behind for a moment, shoulders taut, fury and shock pulsing through him. The fleeting glances of staff going about their tasks seemed to fade, leaving him with the sharp awareness that nothing about his life was going to stay the same. He stared at the empty corridor where the photographer had stood, imagining the headline that might accompany those stolen images. Then his thoughts shifted to the boy's face, the way it reflected his own features. A sudden clarity hit him. As sure as he stood there, that child was his son. And if the press got hold of this, it could tear his carefully built world apart. Slowly, he exhaled, a single-minded resolve hardening in his chest. Logan, left alone in the hallway, realizes in a flash that the boy is indeed his son, and that this secret could destroy everything he's built if it becomes public. He steels himself, prepared to confront Olivia with the truth. Logan stood at the far end of the hallway, shoulders tense, staring at the spot where Olivia and Noah had just disappeared. A swirl of fear and protectiveness constricted his chest. Everything felt surreal. Just minutes ago, he'd been the polished host of a glamorous event, but now he was grappling with the jolting realization that he had a son he never knew about. He forced his feet to move, striding back toward the main corridor with a single purpose: find Olivia. If that journalist's camera flashes had captured anything usable, the fallout would be catastrophic. More importantly, he needed the truth, no more half-answers or evasions. She owed him that, and he wanted to hear it directly from her. A waiter passed by, offering him a quiet, polite nod, but Logan barely noticed. He cut through the crowd, the festive chatter of elegant guests fading into white noise. The chandeliers overhead glittered against the polished floors, oblivious to the emotional storm churning in him. Eventually, he spotted Matteo by the doors of a small office typically used for staff meetings, beckoning to him with a steady hand. Without a word, Matteo led him inside. Olivia stood near a cluttered desk, her arms folded as though she were bracing herself for a punch. Her eyes flicked up when Logan entered. He closed the door behind him, and the muted music of the gala vanished, leaving only the buzz of fluorescent lights and the quiet echo of their breathing. Noah wasn't there. Likely Matteo or another friend had whisked him away to spare him the tension. A pang of regret shot through Logan at the thought of his son being kept away from him, even for these few moments. He turned his attention to Olivia, noticing how pale she looked. She seemed caught between relief and dread. "I guess you want an explanation," she said quietly, forcing her voice to stay steady. "More than anything," he replied, crossing his arms. "All these years, Olivia, you knew where I was. You could have reached me somehow." Bitterness tinged his tone, though shock and hurt still weighed heavier. "Why didn't you tell me about him?" She exhaled shakily, leaning against the edge of the desk. "When I found out I was pregnant, you had already left for that huge deal in Europe. I was terrified and I didn't want to burden you. You'd worked so hard to get your company off the ground." Logan shook his head in disbelief. "That was my decision to make, not yours." His pulse raced, and he tried to keep his voice from cracking with anger or regret. "I had a right to know." "I know," she whispered. "I'm not saying I did the right thing. Back then, I convinced myself you'd left me behind for your bigger dreams. It was easier to believe you didn't want me, or any responsibility. And later, when you rose so high in the corporate world, I kept telling myself you wouldn't want your life turned upside down." Silence settled between them for a moment, thick with all the missed chances and lost years. Outside the office, the gala carried on. Muffled applause rippled through the walls, perhaps for a new speech or musical performance. The contrast between the refined event and the raw tension in this small space was unsettling. Logan looked at her, trying to see past his anger to the vulnerable woman he'd once cared for. "So you ended up here, working at my gala, hiding the truth, hoping I wouldn't recognize you?" She bit her lower lip, eyes flicking toward the window. "I only took this job because I needed the income, and I had no clue you were involved until it was too late to back out. This hotel, it's not exactly easy to find stable employment in this mountain region, and raising a 3-year-old on my own." Her voice caught. "I was desperate." He ran a hand through his hair. "You should have come to me. No matter what, I wouldn't have turned my back on you or on him." Tears glimmered in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I was afraid. Maybe I still am. You're so different now, powerful, successful, and I'm just—" She shrugged, a self-deprecating gesture that spoke volumes. Logan let out a long breath, his anger giving way to a complicated blend of sorrow and longing. "He's my son," he said quietly, the words still foreign on his tongue. "I want to know him. I need to." She nodded slowly, that same sorrow reflected in her face. "I've always known I'd have to tell you eventually. He deserves a father, even if that father is a million miles ahead of me in life. He took a step toward her, voice softening. Olivia, A sudden trill from his phone broke the moment. He pulled it out, silencing it with a quick tap. He didn't recognize the number, but it could have been one of the investors or even a reporter. The possibility that the press had already gotten wind of the story made his stomach churn. Before either of them could speak again, they heard muted voices outside the door, followed by a sharp knock. A member of the hotel staff peered in, eyes full of apprehension. "Mr. Logan, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but one of the VIP guests is asking about some personal rumors. I think you need to address this right away." Olivia pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. She and Logan exchanged a look of dread. Clearly, the whispers had begun. With a tight nod, Logan told the staffer he'd be out in a minute. The door closed, leaving them briefly alone once more. "This is exactly what I feared," she said under her breath. "That if anyone found out, they'd turn your life into a spectacle, or they'd judge Noah or me or you. I didn't want him caught in the crossfire." Logan's jaw clenched. "He doesn't deserve that, neither do you. But we can't hide it now. The journalist got photos and the rumor mill is churning." "I'm sorry," Olivia whispered again. "I never wanted it to go like this." He stepped closer, gently laying a hand on her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered shut for a moment. In that small gesture, they both remembered the closeness they'd once shared, the spark that had ignited something real between them. Then, steeling himself, Logan glanced toward the door. "We'll figure this out. Noah is my son, and I won't let anyone exploit him." Before he could move, another series of knocks echoed through the office. This time, the staffer's voice was more urgent. "Mr. Logan, Miss Olivia, I'm so sorry, but there's a commotion out here. The guests are talking. A certain investor is stirring people up with stories about a potential secret family situation." Logan's eyes darkened at the mention of an investor fueling the gossip. He had a good guess who it might be. He'd dealt with more than one shady figure seeking leverage in business deals. Then the door opened just enough for the staffer to slip back inside, face drained of color. She turned to Olivia with a trembling hand. "You should see this," the staffer said, voice hushed. She handed over her phone, open to a post on social media. Olivia's gaze flickered over the screen, and she felt her heart plummet. A few lines of text hinted at a major bombshell about Logan's personal life, claiming he had an unacknowledged child. The handle that posted it seemed small, but the rumor was picking up momentum in the comments. Logan leaned over to read the post, fury building behind his eyes. This was exactly what he'd built his empire to avoid, scandals that could destabilize everything he'd worked for. But now, his personal life and the well-being of his child were on the line, and that stung deeper than any threat he'd ever faced. The staff member lifted her gaze from the floor, tears shining in her eyes. "Everyone's asking questions. I don't know how to stop it." A dull ache pulsed in Olivia's chest as she handed the phone back. She turned to Logan, feeling a cold wave of dread settle over her. The most vulnerable part of her life had just been thrown into the public spotlight without warning. A hotel staff member rushes to Olivia, pale with anxiety, whispering that a rumor has already hit social media about Logan's hidden child. Olivia and Logan lock eyes, realizing the damage might be done. The murmurs started like a low buzz in the ballroom. At first, most of the glittering guests seemed blissfully unaware, swirling around under sparkling chandeliers as the band played soft jazz. But then small clusters formed, turning into whispered conversations behind raised champagne flutes. A tremor of unease drifted through the room, as though everyone sensed something big and potentially scandalous was about to erupt. Logan watched it happen from the edge of the polished dance floor. He could practically see the rumor spreading from one group to the next, eyes flicking in his direction. Occasionally, he met someone's gaze just long enough to catch the flicker of intrigue or pity. The images of the leaked social media post still burned in his mind. Speculation about a secret child, bits of unconfirmed gossip that could blow up his carefully managed public image. A longtime investor approached him, clearing his throat. "Care to explain what everyone is whispering about?" the man asked, his voice low and cautious, tinged with the nervousness of someone who'd put money into Logan's projects. "They're saying you've got a child you never acknowledged." He paused. "Logan, are we safe to stay invested with you?" Logan's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to respond calmly. "I'm handling it," he said, even though his heartbeat thundered. "This doesn't affect the business side of anything. We'll clear it up soon." With an unconvinced nod, the investor stepped away, blending into the crowd. Logan let out a slow breath, struggling to appear unfazed. He needed to keep his composure. Across the room, Olivia stood by a tall window, gripping the edge of the drapes, her knuckles white. Mateo hovered nearby, and she had Noah close, trying to keep the little boy calm and out of sight as best she could. A wave of guilt coursed through Logan at the sight of them. He wanted to protect them, but the rumor had taken on a life of its own. In the middle of the ballroom, waiters sidestepped swirling pairs of donors who were too consumed by gossip to notice the next course being served. Everywhere Logan looked, the story of his possible fatherhood overshadowed the night's philanthropic purpose. He felt a surge of anger toward the meddling journalist, but also toward the unscrupulous individuals who might seize the rumor to manipulate him. Just then, a tall figure in a crisp, expensive suit materialized at his elbow. The man wore a smug smile that made Logan's skin crawl. "Mr. Logan," he drawled, swirling the dark liquid in his glass. "Heard quite the rumor. Bit of a public relations headache for someone with your profile, eh?" Logan stiffened. He recognized the man, a high-rolling investor named Darius, known for cutting ruthless deals. Darius leaned in conspiratorially, keeping his voice low. "Look, I have no interest in your personal life, but we both know how fast this sort of scandal can hurt a company's stock. Investors like a stable environment. Perhaps you'd be interested in a little arrangement to keep things running smoothly?" Logan lifted his chin, ignoring the tightness in his chest. "I don't respond well to threats, Darius." A cold flicker glinted in Darius's eye. "Not a threat, just business. After all, if you can't control your own narrative, others might use it to their advantage." He paused deliberately. "Let's say we have a quiet conversation about transferring some shares or adjusting certain policies. I could help ensure this rumor stays contained." Heat flared under Logan's collar. "No," he said, voice low. "I'm not making deals with you. My private life is off limits." Darius's expression shifted into a sneer, and he tipped back his glass with a condescending sip. "Suit yourself. But if that journalist or any competitor wants a juicy story, they'll come knocking, and maybe they'll pay for more details, or make sure certain tabloids get the scoop. Such a shame." With that, he walked away, leaving Logan with his fists clenched at his sides. A ripple of laughter erupted among another circle of guests, though it sounded forced and brittle. Logan turned to see more investors eyeing him, their expressions a mixture of concern and anticipation. A second wave of guilt and anger washed over him. How dare Darius try to blackmail him in the middle of this event? Trying to keep his temper in check, Logan cut across the ballroom, weaving through donors and staff. He found Olivia standing by the tall window, Mateo at her side. Noah clung to her leg, looking up at the swirl of adult faces with childlike confusion. The sight pricked Logan's heart. Stepping closer, he bent down to address the boy gently. "Hey," he said, voice soft. "You doing okay?" Noah nodded hesitantly, pressing further into Olivia's side. She placed a hand on his head, then met Logan's gaze with an apology in her eyes. "I'm trying to keep him away from all the noise," she whispered. "But I can't leave the building. It's too chaotic out there." Mateo glanced from Logan to Olivia, reading the tension. "We might move him to a quieter staff room, but that reporter is roaming around. And some of the guests, they're dying for a scoop. Logan's jaw set. I won't let them hound him. He's just a child. He forced a small smile at Noah, trying to project calm. We'll figure out a better spot for you and your mom soon, okay, buddy? The boy nodded again, a glimmer of trust in his eyes. As Logan straightened, a wave of murmuring from across the ballroom caught his attention. Darius was talking to another group, his gestures theatrical. Logan couldn't hear the words, but something about Darius's pointed glances in Logan's direction made it clear he was stirring the pot. Tension sizzled in Logan's veins. Before anyone could stop him, Logan crossed the floor to confront the investor. Conversations hushed as people sensed the possibility of a scene. Darius turned with feigned surprise. "Oh, Logan," he said, not bothering to hide the smugness. "You have something to say about my family?" Logan demanded, voice measured but threatening to boil over. "Because if you do, say it to my face." Darius spread his hands in mock innocence. "I'm just concerned. Rumors like these, well, they can destabilize stock prices, spook partners. The philanthropic aims of tonight might be overshadowed by that scandal." He feigned a sigh. "I'd hate to see your success compromised by one little oversight." "You mean my son?" Logan shot back, voice taut. "Don't talk about him like he's some oversight." Darius lifted an eyebrow, that same cold glint in his eye. "So it is true, then. Fascinating. There goes your squeaky clean image. But I suppose you could keep a lid on it if you'd only—" Logan cut him off, a surge of adrenaline tightening his muscles. "You want me to pay you off? That's not happening." Darius took a step closer, a menacing undertone in his lowered voice. "No, Logan. I want a mutually beneficial agreement. See, if the tabloids get wind of this child, oh, the revelations, the paternity drama, all so delicious, they'd have a field day. Stocks would dip, your board members would panic. And who would step in to take over some of your prized holdings? Possibly me, with a nice discount." In that moment, Logan's restraint frayed. He lunged forward, grabbing the lapel of Darius's suit. A hush fell among the nearby guests, who looked on in shock. Darius didn't flinch. He even seemed to relish the confrontation. "Back off!" Logan growled. "This is my child's life." Darius smirked, lifting his hands in a show of surrender. "Temper, temper. Is this how you want the press to see you? A father, yes, but also a violent CEO who can't handle his own decisions? You're playing right into my hands." Logan tightened his grip for an instant, all too aware of the cameras around them. He could almost hear shutters snapping, capturing this heated tableau. He risked a quick glance at the crowd, spotting Olivia near the window, eyes wide with alarm. The image of her and Noah reminded him to take a breath, to think about what truly mattered. Slowly, Logan released Darius and stepped back, wrestling his fury into submission. Security staff hovered at the edges, unsure whether to intervene. Darius adjusted his suit, flashing that smug smile at the onlookers. "There will be consequences for that," he warned, smoothing down his lapel. "Leave him alone," came Olivia's voice from behind Logan. She had crossed the room, standing a couple of paces behind him, her expression resolute. "Don't you dare use this child for your schemes." A murmur rippled through the crowd, drawn by her boldness. Darius's eyes flicked to her. "And you," he said softly. "I'm sure your story would be quite interesting if told to the highest bidder. Everyone wants a detailed exposé on how a billionaire's hidden fling turned into an unwanted child." Logan reached back, a subtle move to keep Olivia from stepping closer and risking a bigger scene. "You say one more word about her and I'll—" He let the threat hang in the air. Darius looked at the security staff, then back at Logan and Olivia, like a cat playing with trapped mice. Finally, he lifted his glass in a mocking toast and sauntered away, leaving behind a wave of horrified whispers. Logan stood there, fists still clenched, locks eyes with Olivia. In that moment, he realizes that this fight has escalated beyond a mere rumor. They both stand on the brink of losing everything, unless they find a way to fight back together. Logan ushered Olivia and Noah through a narrow corridor until they reached a small side lounge normally reserved for staff breaks. A single lamp glowed in one corner, casting an island of warm light onto the worn sofa. The distant clamor of the Gala still filtered through, but it was quieter here, far enough to catch their breaths. Mateo followed close behind, closing the door softly, as though afraid any noise might summon trouble. Noah clung to Olivia's hand, wide-eyed from the night's upheavals. She led him to the sofa and crouched before him, stroking his hair in a soothing rhythm. He looked between her and Logan, confusion etched on his face, but remained silent. Olivia's heart ached, knowing how bewildering this must be. She wanted nothing more than to whisk him away from the looming storm. But she also felt Logan's tension permeating the air, and she knew they had to talk. Mateo lingered by the door, scanning the hallway through a slim gap. No sign of that journalist or that investor, he murmured, turning to face them with a somber expression. For the moment, we're safe. Logan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. Not for long. He's going to push his advantage. He wants me on my knees begging for a deal. Olivia glanced at Noah, then back at Logan. I'm worried he'll use anything to hurt us, she said, voice trembling with tension. This is more than gossip now. He's threatening your business and, worse, shining a spotlight on Noah. Logan nodded, dropping onto a nearby chair. Anger and fear warred across his face, leaving lines of worry that hadn't been there hours before. I've always known how cutthroat the corporate world can be, he said, but I never thought someone would try to exploit something so personal. I can handle attacks on my reputation, but I won't let them turn Noah into a tabloid headline. Mateo slipped away from the door and perched on the edge of a side table. You said you'd never stoop to deals with that investor. So what's your plan? We can't just wait until morning and hope he changes his mind. Logan hesitated, then looked at Olivia. We need leverage. If we can prove he's involved in something illegal or unethical, it might stop him from releasing any story. He can't blackmail us if he's too busy defending himself. Mateo nodded thoughtfully. Back in the kitchen, I heard a couple of guests mention questionable business practices linked to him. Something about hush money and shady stock deals. Olivia stood, tucking Noah's plush bear into his arms. She spoke gently to her son first, telling him to stay on the sofa and that they'd be right there with him. He nodded, clinging to the toy, eyes reflecting the tense energy in the room. Then she turned back to the men. We can start by asking around discreetly. Some of the staff might have overheard him bragging to colleagues. This hotel has ears in every corner. Logan's shoulders relaxed a fraction, as though a faint spark of hope had lit. Mateo, he said, can you get a couple of staff members you trust to quietly gather any rumors or scraps of evidence? Even the smallest detail could help. Mateo gave a crisp nod. I'll do it. People trust me in the kitchen. They come and go with all sorts of gossip. I'll make calls too, Logan added. Some old business associates of his owe me favors. If anyone's got a record of his suspicious deals, I'll find out. Olivia paced the room, the soft sound of her footsteps punctuating her worry. We need to do this quietly, she said, catching Logan's eye. If we tip him off, he'll move faster. We might wake up tomorrow with every tabloid screaming about Noah. Logan rose from the chair, crossing to where she stood. They locked gazes, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Neither had asked for this chaotic reunion, yet here they were, forced to unite. I should have been by your side from the start, he said quietly. I'm so sorry you had to deal with all this alone. Emotions welled in Olivia's chest, regret, relief, and a glimmer of something else. We can't change the past, she whispered, but maybe we can protect Noah now, together. They both looked at him, small and uncertain on the sofa, and a wave of fierce protectiveness filled the space. Whatever tension still lingered between Logan and Olivia softened under the weight of shared purpose. Mateo broke the silence, clearing his throat. I'll go round up the staff I trust." He slipped out, careful not to let the door's hinges squeak. After he left, the hush in the small lounge felt heavier. Noah fidgeted, hugging the bear close. Olivia walked over and sat beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. Logan joined them, settling on the arm of the sofa so he didn't loom over the boy. "Hey," he said softly, offering a tentative smile. "You doing all right?" Noah peered up at him for a second, then nodded shyly. His little hands clutched the plush bear. "I want to go home," he mumbled, lip quivering a bit. "It's too loud here." Logan's heart sank. "I know, buddy," he said. "We'll leave soon. We just have to finish some grown-up things." He hesitated, then placed a gentle hand on Noah's shoulder. "Is that okay with you?" Noah shrugged, leaning closer to Olivia for comfort. She pressed a kiss to his temple, feeling the child's tension thrum under her palm. Despite everything, Olivia felt a subtle warmth seeing Logan try, in his own unsure way, to reach out to their son. She gave him a small, reassuring nod. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Mateo slipped back in, along with 2 other employees, an older bellhop who'd worked at the hotel for years, and a young woman who oversaw guest check-ins. They looked uneasy about stepping into such a private matter, but determined all the same. They formed a tight circle in the dim lounge, voices low. The bellhop spoke first, recounting how he had once seen the unscrupulous investor slip an envelope to a hotel manager in exchange for clearing out certain guest records. The young check-in clerk added that she'd overheard mention of off-the-books dealings for some big corporate expansions. Mateo chimed in with a story from the kitchen staff about hush money changing hands. Logan listened with growing focus, occasionally asking a question or jotting a note in his phone. Olivia stood close by, arms wrapped protectively around herself. The more details emerged, the more it seemed this investor had built his empire on bribes, shell companies, and intimidation tactics. "If we can compile enough of this," Logan said, glancing around the group, "we'll have a case to threaten him with. One push and his entire house of cards comes crashing down." The check-in clerk swallowed nervously. "But do you really want to start a war with him? He's powerful, and if he finds out we helped, we might lose our jobs." A thick silence followed her words, everyone acutely aware of the risk. Olivia placed a hand on the young woman's arm. "If you want to back out, no one will blame you," she said softly. "We appreciate your help, but you're not obligated." The woman shook her head, glancing at the bellhop, who gave a determined nod. "It's not right what he's doing," she said, steeling herself. "I'll help gather what I can." They mapped out a plan in hushed voices. Staff would quietly search for any physical records or digital traces of the investor's shady requests. Logan would call in favors from a contact or two, hoping to find something that could be used as leverage. Meanwhile, Olivia would keep an eye on the corridors to ensure no suspicious eyes witnessed their efforts, and Mateo would coordinate the safe handling of any proof they uncovered. At the edge of the sofa, Noah yawned, eyelids drooping. It was past his usual bedtime by far. Olivia stroked his hair and murmured, "Why don't you rest, sweetheart?" She looked up at Logan, who offered a faint, grateful smile. He grabbed a spare pillow from a storage cabinet, placing it gently so Noah could lie down. Within minutes, the little boy's breaths evened out, and they all moved a step away to keep their voices from disturbing him. Just as the tension began to ease a fraction, the door burst open. Mateo stood there, out of breath, clutching a tablet in one hand and papers in the other. His eyes shone with urgency and a flicker of triumph. "I found something," he gasped. "Bank transfers, names of shell companies. It's all here." Then his excitement faltered, replaced by concern as he glanced toward Noah. "But this might drag him into it too. It mentions personal leverage the investor was after, and it includes references to you, Logan, and anyone close to you." A subdued hush settled on the small group, the weight of a difficult choice pressing down. Olivia and Logan exchanged a single loaded look. Mateo bursts in with urgent news. He's found damning evidence that could bring down the investor, but it also risks exposing private details about Noah. They must decide, risk it all or back down. Logan stood in the small staff lounge, eyes locked on the tablet Mateo clutched. A file with lines of incriminating transactions and shifty corporate names glowed ominously on the screen. Nearby, Olivia hovered protectively by the couch where Noah slept. The soft light fell across her anxious face as she read over Mateo's shoulder. Every detail seemed to confirm the investor's corruption, bribes, falsified receipts, payoffs to hush key witnesses. It was the break they needed, and also a dangerous secret that could shatter everything. A hush held the room. The air felt charged, as if one spark could set it ablaze. Logan finally exhaled, closing his eyes for a moment. "So this is it," he said, voice measured yet low. "The proof we need to bring him down." Mateo pressed a few keys on the tablet. "That's right, but there's a catch." He swiped the screen to reveal a folder of personal data. "He's been collecting intel on you, addresses, contact details, and references to your private life. Looks like he's been preparing to drop this on the media if you didn't comply." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She saw images of Noah's name, a mention of his approximate age. Nothing definitive, but enough for that man to piece together the paternity scandal. Her gaze darted to the sleeping boy, unaware of the storm swirling around him. "We can't let him use Noah as a weapon," she said fiercely. Logan set his jaw. "Then I'll confront him directly. We have to make him understand that if he tries to leak anything, he'll face this evidence. He goes down if he reveals our secret." Mateo glanced between them. "Are you sure that's the best move? He might get aggressive or try something else if he's cornered." "I know," Logan answered, "but we've got no choice. The longer we wait, the stronger he becomes. We do this on our terms tonight." A moment of resolve passed through the group, a unanimous decision taking shape in the hush of that cramped lounge. Olivia lowered her voice, conscious of Noah stirring. "I'll keep Noah here, but I won't let you face him alone." Logan's protest died on his lips when he saw the determination in her eyes. He understood too well that she had as much at stake as he did, maybe more, since her world had been upended by secrets. "All right," he said, voice hushed, "but please, be careful." Mateo cleared his throat, stuffing the tablet into a secure pouch. "I'll hang back and coordinate staff and security. If anything goes wrong, give us a signal. We'll step in." Logan nodded, took a moment to place a gentle hand on Noah's shoulder, then turned away. Olivia pressed a kiss to her son's forehead, promising to be back soon. Together, she and Logan slipped into the corridor, hearts pounding with a mix of dread and determination. They found the investor in a secluded lounge, a dimly lit room off the main ballroom where high-end guests sometimes retreated to negotiate deals or talk discreetly. He was leaning against a mahogany credenza, sipping a glass of cognac as though savoring his own triumph. The faint hum of the Gala's music leaked through the closed doors behind them. "There you are," he said with a smug grin, swirling the amber liquid. "I was about to assume you were calling it a night, but I had a hunch you'd want to chat." Logan clenched his teeth, stepping forward. "We know what you're doing," he said, voice calm but taut, "and we have the evidence to prove it." The investor raised a brow. "Evidence, you say?" He let out a low chuckle, setting his glass aside. "That's quite a claim, but it doesn't change the fact I hold the bigger card, your hidden child. Or did you forget how the internet loves a scandal? The second I leak your dirty laundry, your philanthropic image crumbles, your stock plummets, and your board members start asking if they backed the wrong horse. You can't threaten an innocent boy," Olivia said, stepping to Logan's side, eyes flashing. "He has nothing to do with your schemes." The investor's gaze flicked to her, a cold cruelty behind his polished smile. "He has everything to do with my schemes, my dear. If a multi-millionaire CEO conceals a child, the tabloids will salivate. And you, well, you'd be labeled the scheming mother who tried to squeeze money out of him. He shrugged with feigned sympathy. Everyone loves a juicy story. Olivia's stomach twisted, but she refused to step back. We have the records of your illegal payoffs, she said, summoning courage. They're damning, enough to bury you under fraud charges. If you leak anything, we'll go public with it all. For a moment, the investor's composure faltered. He narrowed his eyes, assessing whether they were bluffing. Then his lips curled into an icy smile. You think your flimsy evidence scares me? I've covered my tracks quite thoroughly. Logan moved closer, fists clenched. Then let's go through it point by point, he said coldly. Bank transfers, shell corporations, names of people you bribed. It's all here. He drew out a printed sheet Mateo had given him. One phone call, and this goes to the authorities, and every competitor you've cheated over the years. A taut silence stretched between them. The investor's hand twitched at his side, the only sign that he was rattled. You'd be foolish to try, he warned. The second you do, your dirty secret explodes. No one in your precious philanthropic circles will trust you again. From the hallway, footsteps approached. Olivia's heart lurched, afraid it might be the journalist or curious onlookers. Instead, she saw Mateo and 2 hotel security guards slipping in quietly. They fanned out behind Logan, a silent show of support. The investor's eyes flickered in annoyance at the sight of them. Logan arched a brow. Looks like your intimidation tactics are running thin. Unless you have another plan, we suggest you back down. A flash of rage distorted the investor's polished facade. He lunged without warning, aiming a furious shove at Logan's shoulder. Logan staggered but stayed on his feet, adrenaline surging. Security guards sprang forward to restrain the investor, who fought against their grip, spewing threats. You can't ruin me, he snarled, voice echoing in the enclosed lounge. I built my empire from the ground up. I'll crush anyone who stands in my way. Logan steadied himself, running a quick hand over his suit jacket. Olivia moved closer, worry etched on her face. The investor glared at her as the guards pinned his arms. Think you'll walk away happy, Mother of the Year? The tabloids will shred your private life as soon as they get a whiff of that boy's existence. Fury ignited in Olivia's chest. She stepped right up to him, unafraid of his venom. Stay away from my son, she commanded, voice quavering with rage. You threaten him again, and I'll make sure the entire world sees every piece of dirt we've uncovered on you. At that, the investor spat a bitter laugh. So you two think you've won because you have some documents on me? He tried to shrug off the guards, but their grip was firm. I'm connected in ways you can't imagine. Men like me don't go down easily. Logan felt an undercurrent of unease, but his resolve remained fixed. We're prepared for that. Now that we have the proof, your days of blackmail are over. The investor's eyes darted around, searching for an exit. Seeing none, he finally let out a hissing sigh. Fine, I concede. For now. He tilted his head at Logan, malice glittering in his gaze. But don't think you're in the clear. If you so much as breathe a word of those documents, I'll blast your personal life into the headlines with more spin than you can imagine. Security tightened their hold, guiding him toward the door. He stumbled, still trying to wrench free. Olivia glared at him as they passed, every muscle tense. Right before stepping into the corridor, the investor twisted around and locked eyes with Logan once more. Don't get cocky, he snarled. This is far from over. The guards pulled him forward, but he let loose one final barb. The scandal will break in hours. You can't stop it now. Olivia and Logan stood amid the swirling tension, uncertain if the evidence is enough to avert disaster. Olivia and Logan stood side by side in the dim corridor, the aftershocks of the confrontation still buzzing in their ears. A low hum came from their phones, which vibrated with fresh notifications. News outlets picked up stray rumors. A few social media pages carried frantic speculation about Logan's so-called secret. She felt her heart hammer in her chest. It seemed that everything they feared might slip out was teetering on the brink of exposure. Logan glanced at one headline on his screen, jaw tight. "We can't wait," he said softly, switching the phone to silent. "We need to get ahead of this." Olivia exhaled, wishing she could fold time backward and spare them all the chaos. "I'm with you," she murmured, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Their son, asleep in the staff lounge, still had no idea how quickly life was changing around him. Right then, Matteo hurried into the corridor, breathless relief shining in his eyes. "Good news," he panted. "A bunch of staff members have stepped forward. Some have screenshots, call logs, and eyewitness accounts of that investor's manipulation. Real names, real details." A flicker of hope illuminated Logan's expression. "That's perfect," he said, drawing Olivia closer. "It means his threats are on shaky ground. We can expose him if he tries anything else." Matteo nodded, passing over a folder stuffed with hastily printed emails and photos. "Use these," he urged, "and your legal team. If the media tries to spin half-truths, you'll have the ammo to show who the real villain is." Olivia held the folder against her chest, feeling a cautious optimism. For so long she had lived in fear of losing her job, of Logan discovering Noah in the worst possible way, of a scandal that would change her quiet life forever. Now that the worst had almost happened, she realized there was a strange freedom in facing the truth head-on. Logan checked his phone again, grimacing at another incoming text. "I'll speak with my board members tonight," he decided, slipping the phone away. "Let them hear it directly from me before they read some twisted version in the news." He paused, catching Olivia's eye. "But it's not just about the company. I need to come clean publicly, about everything. I don't want to hide Noah. He deserves better than that." Her heart clenched. Though the idea of a grand public statement terrified her, she saw the sincerity in Logan's gaze. "He does deserve better," she agreed quietly. "We can't keep him in the shadows." Matteo gave them a supportive smile. "Then let's do it properly. Turn this fiasco into something positive." He gestured toward the row of ornate doors leading into the main ballroom. "People are still here for the philanthropic event. Maybe it's time you showed them who you really are." A new kind of resolve settled over Logan. He gave Olivia's hand a quick, reassuring squeeze, then strode off to make urgent calls. Matteo followed, leaving her alone in the corridor. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in and out, bracing herself for what was to come. An hour later, with the tension of the night still thick in the air, Logan's key legal counsel arrived. The woman wore a crisp suit and carried an air of unwavering confidence. She discussed strategy with Logan in a low, urgent tone while Olivia hovered near Noah, who had woken from his makeshift nap and was now sipping juice Matteo had fetched for him. Despite the chaotic atmosphere, Noah seemed calm, clinging to his little plush toy as he gazed around the lounge with curious eyes. The lawyer assured them that they had grounds to file charges, or at least an injunction, against the investor for attempted extortion. "If he tries to release anything about your personal life, we'll have these documents to prove blackmail. Coupled with the illegal deals he's orchestrated, he'll face a serious backlash," she explained. "Meanwhile, Mr. Logan, you can issue a statement acknowledging the child's paternity on your own terms. That's the best approach." Logan listened, brows furrowed in concentration. "I want to protect Olivia and Noah," he said firmly, looking to where they stood. "I don't want them hounded by paparazzi." The lawyer offered a small, knowing smile. "We'll do everything we can." A candid approach, honesty and condemnation of the blackmail, often turns public sentiment in your favor. People respect someone who takes responsibility. Olivia's worry softened, if only slightly. Maybe there was a chance this wouldn't be the life-destroying debacle she once feared. After the lawyer stepped out to finalize some paperwork, Logan crossed to the lounge corner where Olivia and Noah were. He knelt down, meeting Noah's bright, curious gaze. "Hey, bud," he said gently. "I know it's late and confusing here, but soon we'll go somewhere quieter." He brushed Noah's hair back, voice laced with an unfamiliar tenderness. I'm your dad, you know." He paused, searching the boy's face. "I'm sorry I wasn't around before." Noah blinked, clutching Olivia's hand. "Dad?" he repeated, eyes flicking to her for reassurance. She gave him a small nod, forcing back the prick of tears. Logan's eyes shone with raw emotion, realizing fully how much he'd missed in these few short years. As the night bled into the early morning hours, the philanthropic event found a second wind. Word spread quickly that Logan would be making a statement soon, and donors lingered out of curiosity, half expecting some drama to unfold. Instead, Logan appeared on a small stage near the ballroom's center, microphone in hand, wearing an air of calm determination. His gaze swept over the scattered guests. Some had parted ways, but enough remained to create a respectful hush as he cleared his throat. "Thank you for staying," he began, voice resonating around the high-ceilinged hall. "Tonight was meant to celebrate philanthropy, but it's also brought to light certain personal matters. Rumors are circulating, and I want to address them directly. No spin, no secrets." Olivia stood near the edge of the ballroom, Noah's tiny fingers curled around hers. Mateo hovered behind her, staff members lined up with a watchful hush. She felt her pulse flutter as Logan continued, carefully explaining that he had recently learned he was the father of a wonderful boy named Noah. He owned up to the suddenness of the revelation, but also praised Olivia for the strength she'd shown in raising Noah alone. "I have no intention of hiding my son," he declared, eyes briefly locking with hers across the room. "He is a gift, and I want to be part of his life, publicly and proudly. At the same time, I condemn those who tried to use personal information as blackmail. It won't be tolerated." A gentle wave of applause swept through the space, quiet but supportive. Several donors nodded in approval, looking relieved that Logan had taken control of the narrative. A handful of camera flashes dotted the back of the room, capturing his resolute expression. Afterward, in a spontaneous burst of emotion, Logan added, "And in the spirit of giving—" He paused, exhaling to steady himself. "I've decided to invest in a new philanthropic project named for Noah, dedicated to helping single parents and children in our community. It's time I use my resources to make sure no family feels unsupported." A bigger ripple of applause rose. Moved by the sincerity in his voice, guests stepped forward to shake his hand. Olivia could hardly believe the transformation she was witnessing. The night had begun in secrecy and fear, yet here was Logan, openly vowing to protect his family and do genuine good. Tears pricked at her eyes. Her heart soared with relief and gratitude. Gratitude that her son might grow up without shame or hidden truths. Gratitude that Logan was standing up for them both. The applause rippled again, and the once hostile tension in the hall seemed to soften into warmth. She let Noah lead her closer to the small stage. He gripped her fingers tight, looking around at the clusters of well-dressed guests who now beamed in acceptance, impressed by Logan's courage. Logan stepped down from the platform, kneeling to meet Noah's gaze again. The boy's eyes darted around, uncertain, but he smiled when Logan ruffled his hair. Mateo sidled up, his relief evident. "Looks like that investor fled the hotel," he whispered. "He left some staff accounts unsettled, but the moment he realized the tide turned, he took off. We have lawyers, security, and staff testimonies lined up. I think he knew he'd lost." Olivia exhaled, the weight on her chest lifting. "Thank you," she told Mateo, voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for everything." He grinned, stepping back to let Logan and Noah share a moment. Photographers lingered, but they seemed content to capture a more genuine scene. Logan reaching for Noah's small hand, Olivia smiling at them both. Strangely, it no longer felt like an ambush of the press. It felt more like an honest beginning. Someone turned down the lights in the grand ballroom. The overhead chandeliers dimmed, making the soft glow of the smaller lamps near the windows stand out. Outside, the first flakes of a gentle snowfall shimmered against the dark sky. It felt like a sign of a fresh start, the hush of winter welcoming them to a new chapter. Logan lifted Noah up, holding him securely in his arms. The little boy giggled, hugging his plush bear. Olivia stepped closer, feeling Logan's arm slip around her waist. Together, they gazed out at the swirling snow through the tall windows. There was something quietly magical about that moment, a feeling that, whatever storms they'd weathered, they'd found a way forward as a family. Soft music replaced the earlier tension, drifting gently across the marble floors. Staff members and lingering guests watched the scene from a respectful distance. An undercurrent of hope, stronger than any rumor or scandal, coursed through the space. Noah tucked his face into Logan's shoulder, shyly peeking out at the wide room. Logan turned, meeting Olivia's eyes. A tender gratitude illuminated his face. She saw not just the powerful CEO, but the man she'd once known, the one who believed in dreams and big possibilities. All that ambition, now tempered by a profound love for the family he'd nearly missed. In the hush of that golden-lit ballroom with snow spiraling down outside, Logan spoke in a voice meant only for her and their son. "I discovered that my greatest fortune wasn't in my coffers, but in the family I almost lost." If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.